Our mission today is to uncover the DNA of the world's most profitable automaker for you by exploring Jeffrey K. Liker's book, The Toyota Way.
And it is quite a ride.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this because my immediate assumption is that Toyota's secret weapon must be some proprietary automation technology or maybe like the most ruthless supply chain software ever coded.
Right, you'd think it's all robots and algorithms.
Exactly. But instead, the foundation of their entire global dominance is actually this deeply human philosophy and an almost obsessive daily war on waste.
Yeah, we are really looking at a masterclass in building a continuously learning organization, and that's a crucial distinction for everyone listening.
How so?
Well, if this were purely a manual on how to assemble a piece of metal, it would only matter to mechanical engineers, right? But the principles we are diving into apply with equal force whether you are manufacturing hybrid vehicles or processing a mountain of insurance paperwork or just trying to optimize your own daily workflow.
Right, it's universal.
Exactly. I mean, the mechanical tools of the Toyota production system, they're frequently copied by other corporations. But those tools almost always fail when the copying company doesn't adopt the underlying cultural philosophy that actually supports them.
And that foundational philosophy dictates that management decisions must be based on a long-term vision, even if it comes at the direct expense of short-term financial goals.
Which is so rare in business today.
It is. There is this story from 1971 regarding the Nixon surcharge that just perfectly illustrates this. So the U.S. government suddenly imposed an import surcharge, forcing customers to pay an extra tax on imported vehicles.
Right.
But later, the government reversed that surcharge, but they did not refund the money to the people who had already paid it.
So the customers were just out of luck.
Normally, yeah. But Toyota took it upon themselves to go back and reimburse every single customer and dealer who had paid that extra tax out of their own pocket.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, Toyota was actually struggling to make payroll. Yet they absorbed this massive, immediate financial loss purely to build unshakable long-term trust.
Yeah, and we see that exact same philosophical muscle flexed again during the early days of the Lexus brand.
Oh, right, the tire issue.
Yes. So some of the very first Lexus customers experienced faster than expected tire wear. And the thing is, this wasn't a defect.
It was by design, wasn't it?
Exactly. The tires were intentionally formulated with a softer compound to deliver an exceptionally smooth luxury ride.
So a traditional automotive company would just point to the warranty specs, explain the engineering trade-off, and dismiss the issue.
100%. They'd say, hey, you wanted a smooth ride, you get softer tires. But Toyota, they mailed $500 checks to customers to apologize for the inconvenience.
Unbelievable.
And it gets better. They mailed checks to people who hadn't even bothered to complain. And incredibly, they tracked down and sent checks to people who had already sold the car.
Wait, really? To people who didn't even own the car anymore?
Yeah. Because they viewed the situation not as a legal liability to be minimized, but as a test of their character when they technically owed the customer nothing.
I love that.
Yeah.
You know, a standard corporation operates very much like a vending machine. You put the capital in, you extract the product out. It's this entirely transactional, binary relationship.
Right. Very cold.
But Toyota operates much more like a complex living organism.
Right.
It actively protects its ecosystem, its offspring, and its relationships to ensure survival over decades, not just the next fiscal quarter.
That's a great way to frame it.
But I do have to push back a little. Looking at the situation with their TABC truck bed plant in Long Beach, California, I mean, keeping a high-cost factory running just to, quote-unquote, do the right thing sounds like a phenomenal way to get fired by a board of directors.
It definitely goes against the standard corporate playbook.
Right, because Toyota needed to move that specific truck bed production to Mexico for logistical reasons. In a ruthless capitalist market, how on earth does a company justify keeping that open? A traditional spreadsheet dictates that you shut the California doors, liquidate the assets, and hand out 600 pink slips. Doesn't that just anger shareholders?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to examine how Toyota views its fundamental obligation to society. They did execute the move to Mexico, but they outright refused to lay off those 600 workers in Long Beach.
So what did they do with them?
Management took on the burden of finding entirely new manufacturing work to bring into that facility so they could keep every single person employed.
That is wild.
And they even celebrated the plant's 30th anniversary shortly after by donating $20,000 to local charities. Toyota does not view maintaining jobs as a painful overhead cost. They view it as a non-negotiable obligation.
Okay, but how does that actually help the company make better cars?
Because this specific behavior is the mechanism that builds the immense psychological safety required for their production system to function. Think about it. Management constantly asks workers on the assembly line to use their brain power to eliminate inefficiencies. Right.
Right.
But if workers know that finding a faster way to do their job means they or their friends will be laid off, they will hide inefficiencies to protect their livelihoods. By proving that employment is secure, Toyota guarantees that workers will never be suggesting their way out of a job.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. They have to trust the system. But that level of mutual loyalty implies a culture forged by genuine hardship, not just some modern corporate rebranding exercise.
Oh, absolutely. The roots go way back.
Yeah, over a century, right. To Sakichi Toyoda, who's known as the king of inventors in Japan. And in the late 1800s, his motivation wasn't to build a global industrial empire. He just witnessed his mother and grandmother enduring this punishing, back-breaking labor of manual weaving.
Right. It was very personal.
Yeah. So he invented automated power looms, specifically to relieve them of that physical toll. His innovation was driven entirely by a desire to support the people around him.
And he was heavily influenced by this 1859 English book by Samuel Smiles called Self-Help.
Which is such a funny detail to me.
It is. But that book championed industry, thrift, and the profound value of learning by doing. And Sakichi instilled those exact values into his son, Kiichiro Toyota, who eventually transitioned the family's engineering expertise from looms into the automotive sector.
Okay, so Kiichiro goes to the United States to study advanced manufacturing, anticipating he would find all his answers at Ford's massive automotive plants.
Naturally, Ford was the gold standard then.
But instead, the most revolutionary insight he brought back to Japan came from an American supermarket.
Wait, so the foundation of the world's most advanced manufacturing system comes from a 19th century self-help book and a trip to a U.S. grocery store.
That is exactly right. The supermarket observation is fascinating. He watched how a customer would pull a specific item off the grocery shelf, and the store manager wouldn't haphazardly order hundreds of replacements.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. The store would restock only the exact quantity of the item that was just taken, precisely when it was needed. That simple, everyday retail mechanic became the blueprint for the just-in-time pull system that redefined global manufacturing.
But before that system could mature, Kiichiro faced a catastrophic post-World War II crisis. The Japanese economy was in ruins, inflation was skyrocketing, and Toyota was staring down imminent bankruptcy.
It was a very dark time for them.
Yeah. And after trying executive pay cuts and across-the-board wage reductions, he ultimately had to ask for 1,600 workers to voluntarily retire.
Which triggered massive, agonizing labor strikes. Which makes sense. People were desperate.
Absolutely. Now, in a typical corporate environment, a CEO facing macroeconomic disaster blames inflation or government policy or unreasonable unions.
Right, they point fingers everywhere else.
But Kiichiro did none of those things. He took absolute personal responsibility for the company's failure to protect its workforce, and he stepped down as president.
Wow.
That level of personal sacrifice just stunned the striking workers. It quelled the demonstrations, but more importantly, it set an unfathomable standard of accountability. It cemented the philosophy of Genchi Genbutsu.
Genchi Genbutsu. Remind me what that translates to.
It basically means going to see for yourself. Leaders at Toyota are expected to intimately understand the reality on the ground and take total ownership of the outcomes. It bred a workforce that relied on itself to solve impossible problems because they knew leadership was deeply invested in their survival.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because that self-reliance was immediately put to the test in the 1950s. A plant manager named Taiichi Ono was handed the seemingly absurd task of matching the productivity of Henry Ford.
Which was basically impossible on paper.
Right. Ford's mass production system was built on massive economies of scale, building huge batches of identical black cars for a seemingly endless consumer market. But Toyota had practically no capital, severe warehouse space limitations, and they were operating in a tiny, fractured post-war Japanese market.
So they had to build a wide variety of different vehicles on the exact same assembly line.
Right, which completely breaks the Ford model.
Exactly. Ford's model relied on a push system. You run the stamping machines as fast as possible to push out thousands of doors, creating massive mountains of inventory, just assuming someone down the line will eventually attach them to a chassis.
But Toyota couldn't do that.
No, because Toyota couldn't afford to buy raw materials or store parts that weren't going to be sold immediately. Taiichi Ohno had to invert the entire paradigm. He developed one-piece flow and implemented the supermarket pull system Kichiro had envisioned.
The gas tank provides a perfect analogy for how this pull system operates. You don't continually pour gasoline into a tank that is already full just because the pump is running efficiently.
That would just be a disaster.
Right. You wait for the gauge to indicate the tank is empty, and then you replenish exactly the amount of fuel you consumed. On a Toyota factory floor, step 1 of the assembly process is strictly forbidden from manufacturing a part until step 2 signals that it has actually used the part it already had.
And this discipline stems from Ohno's absolute war on muda.
Muda being the Japanese term for waste.
Yes. The Toyota production system identifies 8 specific types of waste. Things like waiting around for materials, unnecessary transport of goods, excess inventory, and the production of defective parts.
Why is transport considered a waste?
Well, consider that physically moving a pallet of steel from one side of a warehouse to another does not change the steel. It doesn't add any value for the customer. It only adds time, requires fuel, and introduces the risk of damaging the product.
Ah, that makes sense.
But Ohno firmly believed that overproduction is the absolute worst of all 8 wastes, because it acts as a camouflage that hides all the other inefficiencies in the system.
So traditional mass production operates like someone trying to cook a Thanksgiving dinner for 50 people weeks in advance. You cook all the turkeys, mash massive vats of potatoes, and leave them sitting on the counter, hoping the guests eventually arrive and want to eat them.
Exactly, and hoping they don't get cold.
Right. But Toyota's pull system operates like a Michelin-starred restaurant, where the chef only fires the exact dish the moment the guest places the order. But I've got to ask, isn't it wildly inefficient to idle $1 million machine just because the next person in line doesn't need a part yet?
That's the instinct, isn't it?
Yeah. Because if a highly expensive piece of equipment is turned off, capital is just sitting dead. Shouldn't we keep machines running 100% of the time to maximize our return on investment?
That is the exact trap of local efficiency versus systemic efficiency. Managers love to optimize one specific machine to run incredibly fast, completely ignoring the massive bottleneck it creates downstream. Like Kerr's book details a highly illuminating consulting story involving a steel nut factory.
Oh, the nut factory. Tell them about this one.
So on the surface, this factory looked like a marvel of modern industry. Machines were pulling in massive rolls of steel, rapidly cutting, tapping, and heat-treating hundreds of nuts per minute.
Right. It looks incredibly efficient. Yeah. But when the consultants actually mapped out the lifespan of a single nut, the illusion fell apart. Because they measured the value-added time, which is the literal seconds the steel spent physically being transformed by a machine.
And what did they find?
They compared it to the time that same steel spent sitting in a bin waiting for a forklift, or waiting for the heat treater, or sitting idly in a warehouse rack.
Yeah.
And the actual value-added time was between 0.008% and 3% of the total time the product spent inside the factory walls.
So less than 3% of the time was actually productive work.
Exactly. It took weeks or even months to manufacture a nut that only required a few cumulative seconds of actual work. Over 97% of the time, the company was just financing steel sitting in a box.
This completely unravels the argument for keeping machines running just for the sake of utilization. Toyota manages this through a concept often visualized as a river.
A river.
Yeah. Inventory is the water. When you overproduce and flood the system with inventory, the water level is extremely high. That high water covers up all the jagged rocks resting on the riverbed, the broken machines, the sloppy scheduling, the hidden quality defects.
Ah, so you can't see the problems.
Exactly. If a machine breaks down, no one panics because there are 3 weeks of extra parts sitting in a warehouse. You just pull from the warehouse. But by intentionally stopping overproduction, you lower the water level. Suddenly, those jagged rocks are exposed, and the flow of the river grinds to a halt.
Which sounds terrifying for a manager.
It is. When the assembly line stops at Toyota, it creates an immediate crisis. But because the crisis is immediate, all the engineers and managers swarm the problem to fix the root cause so it never happens again. They embrace the short-term pain of a stopped line to create an incredibly stable, hyper-efficient process over the long term.
Okay, so we can clearly see how this philosophy ruthlessly eliminates waste on a factory floor. But how does an organization structured around standardization and stability pivot to create breakthrough innovation? Because engineering something entirely new requires a different application of these principles, doesn't it?
It really does, and we see this brilliantly executed when Toyota decided to build the impossible, starting with the Lexus project.
Right. Chief engineer Ichiro Suzuki, he was essentially the Michael Jordan of automotive engineering. And he didn't just want to enter the luxury market. He established these no-compromises goals that literally defied the laws of physics at the time.
Because in traditional engineering, everything is a trade-off. If you want a car to go faster, you put in a bigger engine, which makes it heavier and louder. If you want it quieter, you pack it full of dense sound-dampening insulation, which slows it down.
But Suzuki demanded a car that was capable of incredible top speeds, yet maintained an utterly smooth ride.
Right.
And he demanded a cabin that was library quiet, yet structurally lightweight. When his own senior production engineers reviewed the specs, they told him it was physically impossible to manufacture because their high-precision machine tools simply weren't accurate enough to achieve the required tolerances.
But Suzuki completely rejected the concept of the trade-off. Instead of accepting defeat, he formed the Flagship Quality Committee and issued a challenge. Hand build just one single perfect engine that meets these impossible specifications.
Sure.
Yes. And the engineers achieved it. And once they had the physical proof that the engine could exist, they reverse-engineered their own manufacturing processes to figure out how to mass produce it.
That's amazing. And the aerodynamics of the Lexus reveal the exact same relentless drive. They needed a drag coefficient of 0.28 to achieve their fuel and speed metrics, which is incredibly sleek. But the car also had to look like an elegant luxury sedan, not a spaceship.
That's a tough balance.
Yeah. And when the beautiful clay model, sculpted by the styling studio, continually failed the wind tunnel tests, the engineering process just broke down.
Now, in a standard corporate hierarchy, a failed test results in a polite memo sent back to the styling department, requesting a redesign, sparking a turf war that wastes weeks of time.
But that's not what Toyota did.
No. The lead aerodynamics engineer at Toyota didn't send the memo. He physically walked out of his lab, went directly to the styling studio, picked up the shaping tools, and began physically cutting and modifying the clay model himself alongside the designers.
Oh, wow. He just jumped right in.
Yes. He found the exact micro-adjustments needed to marry the mathematical aerodynamics with the aesthetic beauty. That is Genshi Genbutsu, going to the source to deeply understand the reality of the work, rather than just reviewing the data on a screen.
And that commitment to breaking down silos evolved even further when Toyota decided to invent the car of the 21st century, the Prius. The man appointed to lead the project, Takeshi Uchiyamada, was an unorthodox choice because he wasn't a renowned vehicle designer.
No, his expertise was in organizational structure.
Right. He recognized that inventing a mass-market hybrid vehicle required unprecedented collaboration. So his greatest innovation wasn't a new battery chemistry. It was a physical space called the Obeya Room,
which translates to big room. The traditional method for designing a car is highly sequential. The design team spends months sketching a concept, then they throw those blueprints over the proverbial wall to the manufacturing engineers.
And then what?
Months later, manufacturing throws it back, claiming the design is impossible to build. Uchiyamada eliminated the wall entirely. He put the aerodynamicists, the production engineers, the battery specialists, and the exterior designers into one single room.
So they're all forced to work together.
Exactly. They plastered the walls with every piece of visual data, schedule, and performance metric required for the project. By forcing concurrent engineering, if a designer proposed a curve to the hood, the production engineer standing right next to them could immediately evaluate if the stamping machines could handle that shape.
It functions exactly like a brilliantly executed heist movie.
A heist movie.
Yeah. Like if you want to break into an impenetrable vault, you don't email the safecracker, wait 3 days for a reply, and then forward the notes to the getaway driver. You put the hacker, the safecracker, and the mastermind in a single warehouse together so they can continuously adapt and solve compounding problems in real time.
That is actually a perfect analogy.
And they desperately needed that agile feedback loop because the president of Toyota, Hiroshi Okuda, radically altered the timeline.
He did. The engineering team had mapped out a development schedule aiming for a launch by the end of 1998. But Okuda recognized the shifting global landscape and publicly announced that the revolutionary hybrid would be ready in December 1997.
He just moved it up a whole year.
He compressed the timeline to align with a major global environmental summit, leaving the team with a terrifying 15 months from the moment the clay design was finalized to the moment physical cars had to roll off a mass production assembly line.
And to put that into perspective for everyone listening, the global automotive industry standard for developing a new vehicle at that time was 5 to 6 entire years.
It was basically a suicide mission.
Yeah. Toyota accomplished it in 15 months. They not only launched the Prius 2 months ahead of that brutal deadline, but they intentionally subsidized the price, selling it for a highly accessible 2 million yen just to guarantee this critical new technology would permeate the consumer market.
What's fascinating here is how the Prius development highlights the ultimate paradox of Toyota. It is the yet paradox woven into their DNA.
Meaning what exactly?
Well, they are by nature an incredibly conservative, cautious organization. They utilize a decision-making process called Nimawashi, which involves agonizingly slow consensus building.
Right.
They methodically evaluated 80 different hybrid engine configurations before selecting the final design, refusing to rush the foundational choice. Yet the moment that painstaking decision is finalized, they execute with blinding speed, ferocious innovation, and a total disregard for industry norms.
Wow. So what does this all mean for us? It completely shatters the illusion that efficiency is just a toolkit. The Toyota Way is not about buying expensive whiteboards, scattering sticky notes across an office, and slapping the word lean on a meeting agenda.
Yeah, not at all.
It is a fundamental culture of deep respect for human effort, obsessive problem-solving at the root cause, and prioritizing visionary long-term health over a quick quarterly win.
What?
So apply this to your own desk right now. When you look at your daily responsibilities, are you producing inventory, just piles of unread emails, half-finished reports, and delayed decisions that sit in a queue waiting for someone else to process? Or are you creating flow, pulling work only exactly when it is needed, and actively stopping your own assembly line to permanently fix the bottlenecks in your process?
This raises an important question, and it is arguably the most profound insight from Laker's analysis.
Let's hear it.
Toyota operates under the belief that their primary actual product is a continuously learning, highly resilient workforce. The millions of incredibly reliable, highly profitable vehicles they ship all over the globe are simply the inevitable byproduct of cultivating those brilliant, respected people.
That's a huge mindset shift.
It is. So what is the real product of the work you do every day? Are you just cranking out isolated tasks to satisfy a short-term metric? Or are you utilizing the friction of your daily work to build a sharper, more capable version of yourself and your team?
That is exactly the kind of perspective shift that changes how you approach a Monday morning. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Toyota Way. Stay curious, keep learning, and remember, the next time you find your processes grinding to a halt, you don't necessarily need to purchase a shiny new software system. You might just need to lower the water level, expose the hidden rocks, and be willing to get your hands dirty fixing the root cause.